everybody to interview us as staff, but interview the pupils about the essence of what they felt Surbiton was. And from that point, the film company went away and created 3 different scripts, and then we came back and talked about the ones that we most preferred, or we felt was the essence of Surbiton Moor. And this was the result. So some of you may have seen it on social media, and some of you may be avoiding social media. Who knows? And let's hope it works for us. It did just a second ago.
Let's go.
We believe that ambition should be unlimited, that we should be unafraid to question and challenge, that the unusual is usually the most interesting path to take, and that ideas are better when they're unexpected. We are proud to be unconventional, with confidence unabashed. Through compassion, unselfish, undeterred by challenge. And where every last person is truly understood. Ours is a courage that is unstoppable, an inquisitiveness that is unquenchable, with respect that is unconditional, and all in a community united. This is Education Unleashed.
This is unmistakably.
So if you hadn't seen that before, I hope you got a little bit of essence of what we talked about, and how Miles, who was the man who came to do it all, has been doing films for big corporates for a long time, and has started in education because he's passionate about it. So it was really nice to talk to. Quite often when you talk to other companies or big corporates, they don't quite have the same viewpoint as you might have in education. So it was really nice to have him just very, very passionate about it and picking up on little nuances that other people perhaps wouldn't have done. So that was the result, and that is going out. I think it went on social media and it's on the website now, apparently. So, why have I got you all here? Or some of you. Have you pressed the button, Mrs. Johnson? Because I'm going to be in trouble with those parents that aren't here. And when I keep walking out and it's just a blank screen, you'll be nodding to me at home. So the reason for having this evening is primarily because quite often we'll get asked questions throughout kind of one and less one but more two about, okay, what does this journey look like? Because let's be honest, you've just handed them over to us in reception and they've had a great year, and then all of a sudden you're into year 1 and you're thinking, oh gosh, that's gone really quickly. What on earth is the rest of the journey about? And I wanted to just be able to have that discussion with you about what the journey looks like, what the myths and legends that are around the topic of 7+ and 11+ and 13+, because you'll have heard all of that. And what I do think that we get bombarded with when we've got younger children is advice from our friends that have got older children, and you mustn't touch that school because that's not good for that, or you don't want to go there, and we have lots of advice given to us. And I think it's really important that we're able to clear our own minds about what we're looking for. So I want to just give you a little bit of an idea of what the journey looks like, but also what the process is like. Lots of you won't have been schooled here and it is a little South West London bubble. Some of you might have, but actually most people have been either educated somewhere else or in the UK or abroad. So it just gives you a little window of what goes on for the rest of this journey. And the reason for doing it now is because I don't want to lose you. And so you can imagine that parents that have a view about 7 plus or 7 plus, that end of infants, that's a time to move, isn't it? That becomes a thought, and the thought then escalates around WhatsApp, and then it comes back round as a big deal. And I just thought it would be worth us having a little thresh out of that and the pluses and the minuses to all of the process, really. So before I came, you may be aware that we used to have a 7 plus assessment process. That is historical, but it is also something that the Girls Prep do. Now, the reason that the Girls Prep do it is they have some feeders who are just infant schools. So they might have some feeders going where, so Jack and Jill is a good example. I used to work there in Twickenham. It used to end at 7. So those girls needed to go on somewhere else. So LEH takes in at 7. Surbiton used to take in a big intake at 7, bigger than they do now. Wimbledon High used to take in at 7. Guildford taken at 7. So there was a whole, the girls' system was quite very much along those lines. The boys' system, ever so slightly different. So yes, there's very few schools that just go to 7 without having a school that they're attached to. But the bigger picture for the boys at 7 was that moment where you perhaps had decided you were going to board. Your son was going to board, so you would then if you were in Dorset, you would have done the middle school system, which is exactly that 7 to 13 model. And that is the model that most people take if they are absolutely sure that they want their children to board, which isn't as popular as it perhaps was 20 years ago. But it's still, I mean, you can see the boarding schools are still doing very well post-COVID, not during COVID. So that's, and it means that you keep your boys for 2 years longer at prep than if you were letting them go at 11 for senior school. So I'm going to throw just a few facts out first of all, and then give you the opportunity to ask questions. So I decided that I feel if I was to sit down and assess, so you think about your boys now, if I was to sit down and assess your boys now on a day when they'd been up last night, crying till 2 o'clock in the morning, and then they had to come in to do a formal assessment the following morning, and you'd prepped them, and they're 6, and they were going to sit down and be assessed formally. I would miss, if I look at my year 6 boys and their year 5 boys, and I'm sure Mrs. Johnson would concur, I would miss 70% of the really successful boys if I had assessed them at age 6, because they grow at different stages, they develop at different stages, they still have off days. So for me, I didn't want that stress for a parent to have to worry about, let's cram our 6-year-old and let's make sure they're sat down reading and writing, and they're doing all of that more formal mechanical process in order just to get them into school. So I made the 7 plus process not a thing. We don't have a formal assessment. That is not to say, so I've got 5 or 6 boys that are interested in coming into year 3 for next year, but I'll assess them when they want to come in to visit and spend the morning with us, and we'll do the maths and the English with them the same as your boys do, the Pira and Puma, and within the setting of the classroom, so that they can feel that and have a sense of where they'll be, not in a big room where they would sit behind a desk. So that's why we don't run the 7 plus model in the same way. And it came about really because of that missing, for me, this stress for you as parents. The 11 plus and 13 plus debate. So obviously you know that the schools around us are competitor schools. Quite a few of them will go to 13. And lots of parents will ask me why. What is the deal about 13? So the bonus about staying to 13 is you're not paying senior school fees yet. So for 2 years you pay a slightly less than senior school fees. But ordinarily the 11 to 13 curriculum is common entrance. So common entrance was exactly that, a common, done by everybody entrance for a senior school. It derived, it feels like hundreds of years ago, and probably hasn't changed an awful lot. It's quite a didactic mechanical process, and it's a 2-year curriculum where they have to do 7 or 8 different subjects, and they have to be assessed in that by the end of that process. It's a little bit like GCSEs. And you choose French, or some schools still do Latin to common entrance. And lots of schools successfully did that and got away with doing that because the senior schools said, yes, you've sat our pre-test, yes, you've passed that first phase, but actually your offer is dependent on whether you pass common entrance or not. So common entrance stayed a thing because it was always mentioned in those offer letters. About 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, quite a few of the big senior schools in the area decided that actually they didn't want to be marking common entrance. They weren't interested in the results of common entrance because it didn't tally with their own curriculum anyway. It almost stood alone as a 2-year curriculum. It didn't feed into the GCSEs, so what was the benefit, what was the merit of them having common entrance results? So they then said, you have an offer. If you sit your pre-test, you have an offer. It's an unconditional offer. There's no conditions. So that obviously put common entrance on a little bit of a sticky wicket, really, because they were then at this stage, well, what are we doing it for? So a few of our local schools have now tried to adapt and done a bit of a hybrid. So they're doing common entrance, but they're also doing entrepreneurship or enterprise. Or they're trying to kind of modernise that aspect. But essentially they're still doing a public exam, which is marked in-house by your teachers now. So the shift in the senior school thing became very apparent. Also, parents were very much of the understanding, well, actually, my little Johnny is actually quite immature and he's really young for his years. So actually, if he could have another couple of years at prep school, it would really benefit him and he could mature into it and then be ready for senior school at 13. Essentially, that would be amazing if that's how it worked. But it doesn't work like that because you still sit the same day that 11 plus paper as our year 6 leavers do. So if you were applying to Hampton and their exam was in November, you would sit it on that Saturday or Friday in November for an 11 plus entry, so a year 7 entry or a year 9 entry, and you just tick the box to which year you're going. So essentially, you still have to be prepared for that point, even if you're staying on at your school till 13. So it doesn't give you any opportunity at that point to mature or to take a little while longer. About 10 years ago, schools like St George's Weybridge, Kingston Grammar used to put another offer out to people in year 8, so that could have worked for those children. And Kingston Grammar apparently are going to do a few more of that. I don't think they have been, in the last 3 years, they've had a sort of slightly up and down intake, so they are going to offer a few places again in year 8, but there will be a few. I'm talking 3 or 4, and if you think that when we're assessing, when our year 6 boys are going to Kingston Grammar, for example, for an assessment, they're looking at probably 1,000 children sitting for 88 places, not 99 places. And that's St John's is the same. It's increasing by the minute, and this is a wrong time for you to come to this, isn't it? This is not the right time of the year 6. So that's the 11 plus 13 plus debate, and please do ask me about that if I've not explained that clearer. And the senior school response, one of the big things about education is it's quite stuck often, governed by, well, currently governed by how many ministers have we just had in the last 6 weeks? Held by policy, very slow to change often, and which is why in the independent sector it's great because you do have an opportunity to be able to change your curriculum as you see fit. But one of the things that has happened is there's quite a resistance amongst the independent schools, particularly those independent schools that are obviously 7 to 13, for them to change common entrance or to throw it out or to get rid of it. So there has been a huge, I really hate the fact that my watch rings, there has been a huge set of, well, a whole kind of council put together to suggest that we move away from that and we start looking at more innovative curriculum, but nobody has thrown it out. So the IAPS, which is the Independent Prep School Association, and HMC, they're not interested in getting rid of it at the moment because it is bread and butter for quite a lot of those schools. So you can imagine that that's why they have kept with it. So over to I had to put that picture in. I had to use the physical development conversation with Joe Wicks. I mean, why wouldn't you? So the whole premise of the minute they're in isn't my process isn't what are we doing now to get them out. That is not what I am enjoying them in reception in year 1 and year 2. It's amazing. But obviously that is your view. You start to have a thought process about where they're developing, where their skill set is, where their socialising is. All of those things come into play. And for me, the blessing to have homegrown boys is so nice because you see that development and they develop at such different stages. So I said it to you probably last year in reception or year 1, you know, the boys that come in who can read or recognise their name or can write are not necessarily the boys who are high flying for scholarships as they leave in year 6. We all change and we develop at such different stages that you couldn't predict that. But it's about making sure that you are giving them that breadth and that opportunity to see those perhaps issues, to pick them up, to help them through those sticky points. They will all have sticky points throughout their time at school between reception and year 6. There will be very, very few boys who leave us at year 6 without having some intervention or another. And it could just be that you're a little bit stuck with one of the processes in maths, or you're a little bit stuck with English comprehension as it's taken off a bit, and your intervention will kick in at that point. And we make that very much a norm, so that all of the boys are very happy to be doing that, don't feel any different than the next person. So the curriculum design is such that, and we're still evolving, our curriculum design is still evolving, but our views are, yes, we have to teach certain sets of skills, certain, you know, I'm just going to use humanities as an example because it's an easy one. Within humanities, you need to know that something is past and present and there's a timeline of events. But actually, do you have to teach the Victorians? I mean, we do actually in one of our year groups teach Victorians, but do you have to teach the Victorians to understand that? Not necessarily. You could be doing India through the ages, or you could be looking at a country and still get the same timeline and the frame. You don't have that opportunity to be creative when you're in under national curriculum completely. So we do have that opportunity, and for me it's about invigorating them in their learning and making them passionate about what they're learning so it doesn't feel like school is a hardship. Monday mornings, I know, sometimes are. Physical development I mentioned because actually at Surbiton we're pretty good at the physical development. And selfishly, there's a selfish part to that. For me, the physical development aspect of their learning balances beautifully their academic ability. So I know that an active child who is hitting exams at the end of year 5 or the beginning of year 6, or even beforehand, needs to remain active. You'll see some prep schools that in that last term of year 5 and the first term of year 6, they drop fixtures. Their English and maths lessons will be taken with past paper after past paper after past paper. That's not what we want. We want them still passionate about their learning, being taught beyond the point that they need to be, but actually enjoying it and it not being a slog. Of course, there are times when actually they feel like, I've got quite a lot of work on. And sometimes that does come from you as parents and perhaps us as teachers, and that pressure does filter down to them. So the physical development for me is that opportunity where you need to push it as much as you can. If your child is not a football player or a cricket player or a rugby player, that's fine. The physical development is still really important. It doesn't mean that they have to only play those 3 things. And what we talk about very much around it with Mr. Blood is actually you may well be an individual in terms of sport. You may well be going into karate or a gymnast or something that is a bit more single-minded, and swimmer maybe. But actually the physical development and the fitness and the level of fitness for you is really important. So that for me is critical, and we don't ever let that drop as you go through the school. It continues on at quite a pace. The critical thinking aspect comes into lots of those assessments that you'll do further down the school will be verbal reasoning and non-verbal reasoning once you're getting to that year 5-6 stage. And actually, if they're already going through those critical thinking questions at their level when they're young, it's not such a big shock or a big surprise to them when it comes. So again, you'll find people will drop a PRS lesson or a humanities lesson at year 5 or 6 in place of a big block of MBR and a past paper, and we do all of that through our 10 plus and 11 plus clubs. But actually the lessons are about teaching, and Mrs. Johnson is one of the English teachers in year 6, and at the moment they are absolutely blown away by their text, which is Dracula, and they are fascinated by it. The things you can get out of them from a text that they love is quite incredible. And we have an evening in this term where it is just like an open lesson where the boys just share their discussions about Dracula, or what are your thoughts, what do you think the main theme is, and it's amazing. I mean, I was absolutely blown away when I first went in to do that the Friday, and I was absolutely blown away by the content of their conversation and their debating. So that is what we start from a really early age. So we might be talking about squash and a squeeze in year 1, but actually we're starting to do that critical thinking and getting them to ask questions. Lots of your boys are really good at that already. The mechanical process, I don't want you to think for 1 minute we don't do that. Of course we do. We do practice questions, we do practice papers, but we've got mock exams coming up now in the next couple of weeks for that end process. But because they've done throughout their period of humour, they're very cushioned by that. They don't stress about it. It's not a big deal. And if they do stress about it, occasionally we probably get one a year, don't we, Mrs. Johnson, who doesn't want to do their humour, doesn't want to do their period. We work with them about perhaps the best environment for them to do that. So those mechanical processes are still happening all the way through. It's just that we're trying to make them as fun as they possibly can be. The key for me throughout all of this is a relationship. So it's vital for me that the first point of when they come in September to their new transition, that teacher has been given enough information about your child from the year before that they already are kind of hitting the ground running. And because there's so many specialist teachers, so the PE team, the music team, the art department, because there are so many specialists, there is lots of adults that they'll come into contact with, which is really good for them, because that's sometimes where you see in schools where it's only the form teacher that they have contact with, that they just perform for that form teacher and not really for other people. So the beauty of having that specialist model is it does then appeal to, it helps build those bigger relationships. And the pathway, which I'm about to show you, which is really fuzzy, so please don't try and read it. There are some copies here, if you want to take them away. But it does show what we do each year, what we do in terms of assessment. So we benchmark this from year 3. I might have some parents in year 2 in a mild panic about, oh my goodness, what am I going to do about schools? Please do come and see us, obviously. But I'd hope that you weren't, and that would be probably one out of the year group that might come to us at that point. I'd kind of hope that you trust the process well enough that you know it's all going on behind the scenes. So from year 3, we sit what's called a cognitive ability test in year 3, which is your CAT score. So it's a little bit like an IQ, a natural, where their natural level sits. And sometimes that's a bit of a spiky response because it's the first time they've done a online assessment. So it's something that's perhaps new to them and they don't always score brilliantly, and that's the reason we do it in year 3, because we redo it again in year 5, and at year 5 it's much more, they're much more nailed on at year 5 in terms of being quite accurate for their assessment. Sometimes, if they've joined us late or perhaps they've developed late, we might, so some of the year 6 boys now are resitting CATs this term, because just to give us a better view. And how I use those cats as a team, an 11 plus team, we look at the scores of the schools that we've applied to, what whereabouts they sit in those, because they're all standardised scores, and then that's how we advise you in terms of schools. We will say, this is their CAT test results, this is their Pira and Puma, this is how they compare, and then we give you all the qualitative research as well. So year 3, we start on mentoring in year 3. Those are those big picture questions, that critical thinking opportunity, the opportunity to build those relationships in a smaller group, to be really honest and open about the things that concern them or worry them, or the hurdles that they find. And that's a really lovely opening up time. It's groups of, say, 6 or 7 boys, and it won't always be their class teacher, it might be somebody completely different. But it's a really good opportunity for them to feel listened to in a much smaller group. And that goes all the way through twice a week from year 3 to year 6. When they get into year 6, we use that mentoring quite a lot around raising their resilience. They're going from a really nice, cosy environment where everybody knows them to a big old senior school that may have 200 pupils in the year. So we start to build their resilience through those sessions, but we also do quite a lot of interview practice before the exams at that point. And you can see there what goes on in terms of the teaching and learning. The event dates, we have quite a lot of events. We've got a senior school event next Friday? Next Thursday? I'm trying not to think about it, but I think it's next Thursday. Where senior school heads and registrars and admissions come and have kind of a marketplace in the SAR, so parents can just, very relaxed, parents can come and chat to those schools and find out a little bit more before they need to start concerning themselves with it. But we have various touch points, and in fact I'm just in the process of redesigning the touch points for each year group because we're changing the reporting structure. So we're going to add in the touch points, and you'll see that over a period of a year you have quite a lot of touch points that are formal touch points where you can come in, or you get a report, or you'll get the results back, aside from the fact that we want you to use us as an open door policy as well. And then the support that they'll get throughout that year, but also how we'd like you to support. Different children need different things, and some children have a real aversion to doing anything at home and have a bit of a kick up and fuss, and we'll say to those parents, okay, they don't want to do the homework or they don't want to do whatever's been given to them at home, send them back in with it. They won't want to actually go, I haven't done it. They'll be disappointed with that, but they'll still kick up a fuss for you. So we always say, pass it back to us. They then become responsible for it themselves, and we can then have that relationship, and you can continue to be a parent rather than a teacher, which I know we all tried and tested during COVID times, but it's not to be repeated, is it? It was tried and tested. These are our destination schools from the year before last, and the reason I've put them all up here is just to show you what a wide scope of schools that they apply to, and the ones that are the regulars, and then there's a few there like Queen Elizabeth School that you'll see. Whitgift, we've sent one to in the last 3 years. They won't necessarily be our go-to, and these can be all available to you, but you can see then how that changed. Last year, again, a little bit more of a shift. Interestingly, probably more boys at Claremont than had in the past. The new head there has started to have some impact, and that has changed viewpoints. And it is very much what's popular on the school gate about discussion or WhatsApp, about what happens, and you are quite influenced by that. And we try as much as possible to say, please come to us to discuss your individual child, because your individual child is very different than the person he sits next to. You'll see that Hampton result there. So we had 10 offers last year, which we had 40 boys leaving us, and so for a quarter of them to get a Hampton offer was pretty significant. And in fact, we were the second largest school to have the largest amount of offers. The only ones above us were Hampton Prep themselves, and they have 4 shots at it, so you'd hope so. So really impressive results, but they were a really high achieving year group, and every year group changes. So we knew when this year group were in, this year group here were in year 4, that they were really high achieving. Quite a few of them sat for 10 plus, quite a few of them did Hampton and Kingston at that point to secure a place. They don't always go to Hampton and Kingston if they sit them in year 5. They quite often change their mind and go elsewhere, but they have the security of having that in their back pocket. So you can see we had quite a few more who went further afield. So Licensed Victuallers is out in Windsor. We had Emmanuel, which we've not had Emmanuel for quite a few years. And we had quite a few more interested in Radnor than had been before. And then you can see the tail end of that. 3 went to Guildford. Actually, only 2 went. We had 3 offers, but 2 went to RGS. And there's a little bit further out. 1 went all the way to RGS Worcester. So there's a whole variety of schools they go to, and it's so important if you think about it. I mean, obviously what you choose at this age is the most important, but actually at that 11 to 18, that's vital. At that point, you are doing your 2 major public exams, and that is life forming for the rest of your university or whatever it is that you go on. So that decision at senior school is really important, which is why we work really closely with you. We're a big team. We'll tell you whether 10 plus is a no-go or not. We'll give you a good indication of what will be aspirational and what will be the right amount of schools. So certain children who perhaps get quite anxious or get quite flustered, we wouldn't say sit 10 schools. I've got a boy this year sitting 10 schools. Now, ordinarily, I would never, ever say that was a good thing. For this boy, it'll be water off a duck's back. He'll be fine. He'll walk in, walk out, no problem. But I would never normally advise that. So we would look at a number of schools, and we'd probably go, yeah, okay, maybe 5, maybe 4, depending on what scale you're looking at, and depending on how we've obviously got to consider at that point the strategy. We take each case individually, but the strategy we sort of employ at that point is, hold on a minute, Johnny is not brilliant at creative writing, so that's not going to be his strength. So maybe those schools that are putting a lot of emphasis on their creative writing we shouldn't go for just those schools. So let's look at the spread, let's look at the dates, let's look at making sure that he's got some before Christmas and some after. Let's make sure that the interview process, if Johnny's amazing at interview, let's make sure that that's one of the ones where interview makes a big difference. So places like Reeds, for example, you put your application in for Reeds and they ask you for interview really quickly. The interview's not going to be the deciding factor, but you've already shown your face, you've made an impression. So just RGS, Dr. Cox still does lots of his own interviews, and he puts a lot of importance on them, as does Claremont. So that does change yearly, and unfortunately, because COVID rumbled the whole thing, where they, for years and years and years, have all done really similar assessment, to have kept what worked for them. Of course, at COVID time, they had to completely abandon that and do a completely different approach. So what happened after COVID is they then realised, actually, do you know what? When we've got 700 pupils applying and they can do it online or digitally and it's marked for us, we might go for that option. And so quite a lot of the schools have then chosen that option. Some have added in, let's have some creative writing as well, let's do an interview, let's do a joint, but they're changing. And so where before I could pretty much say to you that for the next 3 years it would likely to stay quite stable, they're still very much in a changing state at the moment. So ISEB, which is an umbrella over some of the exams, some of the pre-tests, used to be just St Paul's and King's did that. But when COVID happened, quite a lot of schools, so Reeds, Epsom, got onto doing that, and actually have found that that's given them a good view on the calibre of pupils that they want. So they've kept that. So Reeds this year was the biggest surprise. This year has gone with ISEB again. So it changes yearly, and that's our job, to keep on top of that. It's not your job to to be worrying about that. You've got other stuff to do. But we guide you all the way through and we hand hold you all the way through. We can't make miracles happen. So if you come to me and I know your son is doing okay and he's absolutely fine within the class group, but you want a scholarship at St Paul's, we can't make that happen. And we'll tell you that that's not likely to happen. But we are aspirational for them. So we absolutely want to try and push them for the aspirational school that is, you know, your choice, our choice, and we know that they would like it and they'd fit in with their personality. Lots of schools have a little personality of their own, little culture, and you can see that, and you can tell the boys that would suit that or wouldn't, and they're all very different for that. So I've rattled on for a long time, and I'm just going to open it up to questions. Has anybody got anything really testing?
No, it's very basic. You mentioned 7 plus, 11 plus and 13 plus. What is the 10 plus?
Okay, sorry, yes, I didn't mention that. So some schools, St James in Ashford, Kingston Grammar and Hampton all do a 10 plus assessment. It's done in year 5. If you are sitting at the very top end of your cohort, and we'll tell you that, if you're sitting at that top level, we might suggest that you go for it at 10 plus. It's quite a good return in terms of results, although it's very competitive. What they don't do, any of those schools at 10 plus, is St James is very different process. It's nothing like as selective as Kingston Grammar and Hampton. What they don't do at 10 plus is don't take much notice of our reference, and they don't have any dialogue in terms of, well, hold on a minute, they didn't do very well on the day, so we know, what are you thinking? Whereas at 11 plus, we do have much more of that dialogue. It is a numbers game at 10 plus. So if your son, you thought, actually, Kingston Grammar is really where I would like, you might choose to do the 10 plus. It doesn't mean they can't do the 11 plus if they don't get it. It doesn't mean you can't do it again. Some parents feel that for their child it's actually a little bit of a push in the right direction and it kind of gets them started. But actually for some children it's too much pressure at that age. I mean, let's be honest, they're 9 when they're thinking about that, and it's a bit too much pressure. And if we know that actually they won't react very well to that, particularly if they don't get it, and the chances are it's a big gamble, so the chances are they might not, we try to discourage you from doing it, because actually us spending the time and picking up the pieces and building that confidence back is wasted, fruitful curriculum time that we could be pushing them forward. So we kind of hope that it's a trusted journey that works for all of us and that we're all in agreement, and most of the time we are. Last year, I would say we had one pupil last year who didn't get his first or second choice, and we had one pupil who hadn't got his first or second choice right up until June 17th and was then offered his first choice. And that can happen. It is a little bit like clearing. So it can be that you've sat 4 or 5 schools, you've got 1 or 2 offers, you're on a wait list for one, and you have to wait for that little domino effect, and then the offer becomes available. But that's hard for your boys. It's quite a difficult time because they know that some of them have got places and they're waiting, and we manage that really well. So we do lots of one-to-one and lots of time for them to actually talk about it and what their concerns are, and they're really good at that by then. Mrs. Johnson.
Can I just say that if they do sit the 10 plus and they get a place, they don't leave at the end of year 5, so they stay until Mrs. Chong knows this, but she's thinking about so many other things, but they will stay with us for year 6. It just gives them a place, and if they choose not to then sit the 11 plus, they've got their 10 plus place. But as Mr. Chong said, most boys who are gifted with or are awarded with the 10 plus, they do sit other schools as well and keep their options open, so they don't leave us in year 5. Yeah.
So one of the boys got 10 plus at Hampton, and I feel that is absolutely the right school for him. It would really suit him. It suits his personality, it suits his academic profile, but they're throwing the hat in the ring for St Paul's as well because they've got Hampton. So actually they'll give St Paul's a go. And I don't disagree with that, because he's quite competitive and actually he needs to be challenged. So it might be that in order to continue working at the pace that he's working, that's probably quite good for him, because you do want him to hit the ground running in year 7. So we build the strategy around each individual child, and hope that process is as mutual one as it can be, really. Very rarely do we get any complete surprises. They're usually pretty accurate. What parents occasionally do is forget that we talked about a school being aspirational and think, well, you've got to push now. You said, I spend money on school, so you now need to make it work. Well, that doesn't work either, not quite like that. We will do our absolute level best. You don't get anybody more dogged than Kelly Smith at absolutely chasing it all the time. And she is on the phone constantly to them, and if we don't get the offers that we want, she'll be plaguing them with phone calls. So quite often they'll be, okay, fine, that's it. But she's very, very, we've got a really good relationship with most of them. And some of the schools that are new, obviously we're building up new relationships with. New head in at KCS at the moment. You as the new heads go in, they want to always change uniforms, food and admissions. Tend to be the 3 things. So it's about us building that relationship really as well. So knowing your boys, but also knowing that destination school really well. Any other questions?
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. How can we find out more about a sort of potential senior school in a sort of slightly more independent way? And not criticising the way you've described any of it, but just say, for example, I went to school. I went to King's College School, Wimbledon, but that was 20 years ago, 25 years ago. It's probably changed. How would you sort of mentioned some of the events, like meeting?
You should go. We encourage you to go and have a look. Go to their open mornings. I mean, they have become a bit tight with their open mornings since COVID, where haven't they all kind of. It's not a free for all now, where you can just go and arrive. You have to book on, and they're all booked up ahead of time. What we try to encourage you to do is, if you wanted to do early research for yourself, go ahead and do that. Interestingly, I probably said that to you when you came to look, but lots of ex-Kings parents want Kings. I think I remember that conversation. It is interesting. Out of all of them, it's really interesting. Yeah. And it's an amazing school. And yes, it has changed, but actually, essentially, the traditions that it had are still maintained. And it's a brilliant school, absolutely. But it doesn't suit everybody, and it's in the same way that Hampton doesn't suit everybody either. You have a really good view, but what I would say to you is go and have a look yourselves first, and then don't start worrying the boys too early, because actually it's really interesting. In year 6 you'll get parents saying, well, I do want him to have a choice, he needs to be the one that makes the choice. I mean, I had one boy in tears last year who had 2 schools, and his parents had handed it over to him to say, you choose which one you want. He didn't want that. He said, can you just choose for me? I said, I absolutely can't choose for you, but your parents can, because actually you have a view in your mind and you get a bit hell-bent on, my son's a brilliant hockey player and I really need him to go to a hockey school. Well, interestingly, by year 8, he's now rowing. He's not interested in hockey at all, and you've chosen that school based on hockey. So sometimes, yes, the boys need to feel the comfort, but it's more about like you buying a house, where you go in and you think, yeah, I can imagine us here, or I can imagine him here, and then talking to them, they are sold by food and what the process was like when they go round. So Reeds 1 year for their open morning did bacon sandwiches and juice. Well, that was it. They all wanted to go. I mean, it was a complete giveaway. So it's really important that you don't let them have complete say, and that we work together on what that. It's quite a lot of responsibility for them at 10, which is why it's better for you to go and have a look. And what we encourage you to do in year 4, if you're looking at 10 plus, or the beginning of year 5, to go and have a look at them, have a feel, see what your thoughts are, and you'll certainly discount a few at that point, and then take them the following year when it's actually becoming a bit more real for them. But definitely, there's so much online now as well that you can see, that you get the videos that it gives you a good indication. But you can definitely get, because King's, St Paul's, because they do an early intake, they do have open mornings that run fairly regularly, so it's worth having a look. You can see with any teachers there that you remember.
I really don't
You'd really
have
hope
any
not.
preconceived ideas.
You'd really hope not. That is so funny when well, we have it here. We have it here that people will come and they've been to Surbiton themselves as a senior maybe, and then they're asking, was that teacher still there? And then you go, yeah, actually, they are. I mean, my first cohort of children now are 39. That is frightening. Absolutely frightening. Don't like that one bit. But essentially, the traditions, whilst I'm sounding glib about the change of head, whilst heads do change, often the essence a little bit, they don't change the missions and values on the whole. They don't completely reshuffle a school that's got some really strong values. So Hampton's been the same. Missions and values probably for the past 20 years. And St Paul's has shifted a little bit. Sally Huang, who's just gone in as the new head, has shifted things a little. But it's keeping on top of that that's quite important. So it's well worth you having, if you've got a view, to go a couple of times to have a look. Anybody got any other questions? Someone had, yes, you did.
What sort of age and stage do you begin forming a view of where would be a good place for the boys to go?
So it's really important that you don't form a view really early on, because, as I said, they change really quickly. And the danger often is that you make a judgment early on that actually either isn't aspirational enough or perhaps is too aspirational, and then they're living up to that pressure point. So it's quite important not to make a fixed judgment of it, and certainly not to share it with them. That's for sure. And last year we had an issue, didn't we, with year 4, some of the year 4s who had been very vocal with their boys, and then their boys were vocal. Their boys were fine about that process and fine about the schools, but some of their classmates weren't, and they were a bit unaware of where they were going to go, and it did cause a little bit of angst in the class. So we tend not to share that particularly overtly, but we would meet with you from as early as you wanted to, really. And often with some of if you look at some of our reception children now, you know that innately they're really capable. They're really inquisitive, they're curious, they've got a real thirst for knowledge. But that thirst for knowledge is really around dinosaurs and steam engines at the moment. But that's okay, because that will transfer, and you don't sometimes see that until year 4 or year 5, when they're actually hitting that next stage. So we quite often see a stage where they first join us, and I think you will have all agreed, you handed over a toddler to us at reception, and actually what you've got back at the end of reception is a completely different child, actually, almost. That learning that takes place in reception is just mammoth. But once and each year it changes and the development stages change, but once they get to kind of year 2, some of the boys that are a bit more mature might, or maybe quite old in the year, might have this towards the end of year 1. But most of them get to a year 2 stage, and they'll start to have, the best way I can describe it is they start to have a sort of understanding of their place in the world a bit, and they become maybe a bit clingy, and all of a sudden don't want you to go out and don't want a babysitter. Maybe they dream a bit, maybe they're conscious about dying and what death means, and they become a little bit more focused around, it's not just all about me and my egocentric play, this is actually I've got a place in society, and oh my goodness, what's going on around me. So that happens at about that age, and so sometimes you see a development change at that point, and then again at the end of year 4 you have a divide. So you'll have a group of boys who are quite streetwise and quite savvy and a little bit lippy at times, and then you'll have a whole other group of boys who are much less mature, and it doesn't mean that they're more or less capable, but it's about capturing it at the right point. So it would be far too early to say at an early stage, yeah, this is your pathway, because it can change really rapidly, but we wouldn't want to leave it too late to have that discussion for sure. I've had lots of lots of parents who go to C schools at say year 4 have a completely different set of schools by the beginning of year 6. Interestingly, just for different reasons at that point. So you can track, we give you all the information on the results, so you can track their results as you go, so you can see where they sit, but sometimes that changes dependent on their development.